Welcome back to my channel. So this is part 2 of a series I'm doing about being brown in Japan. If you haven't already, I suggest that you watch part 1 of the series first, because I talk about my history, my background, and how I became interested in Japan in the first place. And so this part is talking about my actual experiences living in Japan. So like I said before in my first video, I've been here for about 5 years. This is my 5th year in Japan, and I live in Shizuoka. The first half of this video will mostly be about negative experiences I've had in Japan, because that's what happened to me when I first got here. And the second half will mostly be positive experiences I've had here, because I learned how to deal with certain things that I think any ALT who is not white would experience. So I moved to Japan in August 2014. I had the Tokyo orientation. So if you're a jet, you'll spend about 2 to 3 days in Tokyo for your initial training before you move on to your prefecture. I remember the rooms being mostly white people. You can literally count on your hand how many people of color there were. And mind you, there are like over 1,000 people at least in Keio Plaza Hotel where the training is at. Actually, on the second day, I remember meeting like a Desi dude there. For those who don't know, Desi means anybody from a South Asian country like India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, etc., who lived outside the homeland. Anyways, he was Desi and British, and I think his name was Raj. I also saw quite a few Black and East Asian ALTs at the orientation too. Most of the Desi people I saw were not American. They were actually from Trinidad and Tobago. I think, based on like what I've seen in the past few years, most of the ALTs coming through who are Desi tend to be from the UK and Canada. Not to say that Americans can't get in, it's just the amount of people are less. But yeah, they're usually either from the UK, Canada, or they're usually from the UK, Canada, or Trinidad and Tobago. And so in JET, on the second or third day of orientation, you have a welcome party, and your tables are arranged by the prefecture you'd be placed at. Our name tags also had our names. They also had our JET ID number, placement, city, and prefecture, etc. on them. So when I went to the Shizuoka table, there was this brown girl with curly hair and glasses, and we started talking, and I found out that we were both like huge K-pop fangirls and Fujoshi. We love yaoi. But we were also both Desi. She became my first friend during my first year, and she's Bangladeshi Canadian, like freshly Bangladeshi Canadian. She literally got her Canadian like citizenship a few days before she applied for JET. It was interesting because I think during my first 2 years, my prefecture had more ethnically and culturally diverse ALTs compared to others. I was placed in the same teacher housing as 4 other ALTs. The type of ALTs that'd be around me would be way more diverse than it is now. But I think it's just whoever applies, really. The Bangladeshi girl I met, she ended up being in the same teacher housing as me, which was pretty cool. And there were 3 other ALTs who were also in my same teacher housing. The other ALT was a first-generation Mexican-American from California, and she's awesome. I still talk to her. And one other first year was half Japanese, half Italian, I believe, and he's from Jersey. If I recall correctly anyway, this was years ago. And there was this one, I believe, third-year ALT. She was our senpai. And I think she was part Maori, and she was from New Zealand. And outside of that, most of my senpai were white, but there was this one fifth-year black Trini ALT who I ended up becoming really close friends with. I still talk to her sometimes. So I was lucky enough to be surrounded by a diverse group of people even when I moved here in the very beginning. When I came to working at my school, I ran into some interesting situations at first. So a little background about my school. My predecessor was actually third generation Korean American. She spoke N1 Japanese even before coming here, and she stayed for like 2 years before I arrived. And my grand predecessor was a white British ALT who stayed here for about 5 years, and she also spoke like N1 Japanese. And she had like a judo certification and everything. Like, my school worshipped her. I felt so bad for my predecessor because they love my grandpred so much. And they still talk about her even though she hasn't been here for like, what, 8 years? But yeah, my school was used to having a woman of color as an ALT at that point. Because of my predecessor. But they spent like 8 years total with an ALT who knew Japanese pretty fluently, so they weren't used to talking to an ALT who didn't really know Japanese, and that was a hurdle I had to go through a lot. Because when I came along, I didn't really speak that much Japanese, to be honest. And actually, like, I wasn't able to study abroad, and I had a 2-year hiatus from studying Japanese, so it turned out I knew even less than I actually did, especially when it came to using Keigo or using Japanese at a public school. I never understood the morning meetings ever. When you start working at the high schools, you might participate in the morning meetings or the uchiawase, so they make announcements on random things. They tend to have a lot of tea in the morning meetings, so I highly recommend that you study up your Japanese so you can listen to the tea. Usually it's about like kids getting in trouble and crazy scandalous things that happen in like the schools in the prefecture, maybe even Japan. But another problem I had was like a lot of the English teachers at my school who were Japanese, they did not speak any English at all. They could not speak one word of English. They could not understand what I was saying, even when I spoke very slowly. And I felt extremely isolated and shy at the school for the first few months because I felt like nobody really wanted me to be there. And I was left out on a lot of things. Like, literally nobody would tell me when undokai was. Nobody would tell me when my classes got canceled. Nobody even gave me like a proper rundown on how to use a copy machine. Like, there's all these things that my coworkers were supposed to show me but didn't. And I had 2 supervisors, but they were literally like both useless. But my students were really awesome. When I first came, it was Obon, so there weren't any classes, and I ended up tutoring students for a speech contest. I met this student who turned out to be half Filipina and half Japanese, and her entire speech was about fitting into Japan. And later I also found out that a lot of my students were actually Filipino, Brazilian, Peruvian, and Chinese. A lot of them are mixed with Japanese. And I felt really lucky to be in my school because I got to see a part of Japan that nobody else gets to see in other areas. My school is considered a low-level school, a public high school. So in Japan, high school education isn't mandatory. You have to take an exam and stuff. My high school has a high acceptance rate, and less than 25% of my 1,000 plus students end up going to university after they graduate. And most of the students end up going to Senmon Gakko, which is like vocational school or trade school. And they know very little English, so it was a little challenging at first. But my students were kind of like the students from Gokusen. If you haven't watched Gokusen, I highly recommend it. It's the best J-drama ever. It's about a teacher who's secretly like a ringleader in the Yakuza, but her dream is to work as a teacher, and she teaches like these Yankee kids. So yeah, I highly recommend it. Most of my students were not shy at all compared to like a lot of Japanese students you might hear about. Even if they didn't know English, they seemed very charismatic and like really crazy and loud in class. And I was really relieved, to be honest, because I was worried that my students would not be as excited to interact with me as I would with a white ALT, and I think it's a very legitimate concern. Even other ALTs I've talked to, black or POC, they get worried about if their successors would be white, because if you have blonde hair, like, they'll be all over you. And another interesting I've noticed was that my students were more accepting of me than my coworkers at times. And even Japanese teachers from other schools, and I'll tell you why later. Now, when it came to team teaching, I did run into a few hurdles when I was planning my lessons and getting along with the JTEs. I think I mainly had problems with one or two of them. I remember it was wintertime. I was planning my lessons for my second year students, and in the advanced elective class, there was a JTE, and her name was Yamamoto Sensei. I literally don't care about using their real names because they're like very common Japanese names. I don't think I'll get in trouble. But yeah, Yamamoto Sensei. There's a Yamamoto in like every school, personality wise and name wise. Anyways, Yamamoto Sensei wanted me to teach the elective class about winter holidays, but only Christmas. She refused to let me teach about any other holidays, even though Christmas is basically shoved down their throats. I don't mind teaching kids about Christmas at all. I love Christmas. I celebrate with my friends, and I celebrate it secularly. And I know it's a huge part of American culture. However, I do have a problem with not being allowed to teach my students about other parts of America or other parts of American culture. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it gives a false narrative of what an English-speaking country is like in general. When you learn English and move to a new country, you don't have to, like, erase your original culture at all. Like, especially in the U.S., like, the message that the U.S. tries to promote at times is the fact that we're a melting pot and that we're so diverse and accept each other, even though lately it hasn't been really true, right? Also, I think the Japanese English curriculum is oversaturated with what they think American culture is like, not what the U.S. is actually like. And that makes these kids a lot more ignorant and way less prepared for visiting other countries. Christmas is constantly shoved down their throats since elementary school, and even in the Japanese media and stuff, and it's already common knowledge, and I feel like it's a total waste if I didn't teach them about how multicultural people in the US can be, because they wouldn't learn about it anywhere else, really. I was compromising with Yamamoto Sensei, and I ended up making up a PowerPoint about Christmas, Hanukkah, Ramadan, Eid, and Kwanzaa. And the kids were actually, like, genuinely fascinated by it. But I noticed that she refused to interpret what I had said about the holidays besides Christmas. She also kept asking me in front of the students about why I never had a Christmas tree in my house and why Muslims don't eat ham because it's so delicious. And I thought it was very interesting because I left Islam and I told her this, and she still, you know, would ask these questions and kind of interrogate me in front of the kids. It was kind of awkward. I was really irritated at her, but I tried my best to stay calm and not waste any time. So I threw some questions back at her towards my students, and honestly, I think that's the best strategy for dealing with these kinds of people. If you get all these kinds of ignorant questions or comments, just keep asking them questions back and make them think. If they really come from a genuine place of, like, wanting to learn more, they'll understand. If they continue to be racist or stereotypical about you afterwards, then screw them, honestly. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm only focusing on the people who actually do care. Don't waste your energy on these people because they will never learn. They'll just believe whatever they want to believe, honestly. And so these were the questions I asked them. I asked them, you know, why do you think that Americans celebrate Christmas? Like, why do you think Americans only celebrate Christmas? And why do you think you have never heard of these holidays before? Because in America, they show these other holidays on TV and they teach it in elementary school, usually, you know, so how come you don't know about these holidays? And do you actually know why Muslims don't eat pork or drink alcohol? And if you don't know, why don't you know? You know, I ask these very rhetorical, philosophical questions to really make them think, where are they getting this information from? And I think that's where they start to open their minds a bit and realize that, you know, realize like, oh, I don't know this because of X, Y, and Z. And they start to realize where they're getting this information about other countries from. It's from the media. It's from pop culture. It's from things that control how much representation minorities have, right? And even though Yamamoto sensei was being mendokusai AF, like super mendokusai AF, I'm not even kidding. I still managed to reach out to these kids. How can I reach these kids? And some of them even did some Googling and got more fascinated and would come up to me, you know, outside of class, which was awesome. That was my goal. That was my number one goal. And I think another reason why Japanese people seem more comfortable with white people even after World War II is because they're constantly exposed to them in the media and in their schools. If we did the same thing with representation, I know it would definitely not be as easy, but I think we'd be more humanized with that awareness, and people would respect our cultures and customs a lot more with representation. So moving on, I have a lot more stories, but I'll save it for a different video because I don't think it had to do with my race. I think it was more about my gender, if anything, and my age. As for interacting with my coworkers, I had almost zero problems most of the time. There were a lot of young male senseis from other departments that were really friendly with me, even when I spoke garbage Japanese. I actually ended up dating the hot PE teacher at my school. It didn't end well. If you want me to make a video about dating the hot PE teacher for a year, like, let me know in the comments below. But I did have this other older female sensei that I had some issues with besides Yamamoto sensei, and her name was Sahara sensei. And she wasn't an English teacher. I think she was a marketing teacher or something. The first thing I noticed was that, like, her and Yamamoto sensei would constantly comment about my weight and my skin tone. I'm not skinny and I'm not pale either. Even though I might look like that in the camera, I'm actually more tan in real life. I already knew that this would happen before I even came here. It even happened to me when I used to live in China, but this made me more nigate with the older female senseis, and I was like Mariah and I ignored them. There's this one week where I didn't bring food from home for lunch because I wanted to buy food at the Kobai. And the reason for that is because I wanted to live my weeaboo dreams and I wanted to try the karepan. And I wanted to try karepan from Rama 1.5. And, you know, I wanted to experiment. I wanted to try melon pan. I want to try karepan. I wanted to, like, you know, talk to my students at the Kobai, you know. Anyways, I had every right to not bring lunch to school. I am sorry. Anyways, Sahara sensei, again, she was not an English teacher. She was a marketing teacher. But, and even though she didn't know English, she made it very clear that she hated me. She would keep asking me why I did not make my own bento, and right back at her, I was like, well, how come the male teachers don't make their own bento? What? She also patted my stomach and asked me if I had a baby inside, and I would just say, it's a food baby. I'm really surprised that I haven't gotten an eating disorder out of this. I'm really surprised that these comments haven't really gotten to me, because I know if she said these things to me when I was younger, I would have totally, you know, had a really bad body image about myself. So I'm actually happy that I've kind of moved past that. As for Yamamoto sensei, she would make this comment about my skin tone during undokai. Here's the tea. For those who don't know, undokai means sports festival. So in Japan or in Japanese schools, usually in the fall in my area, each homeroom competes against each other in different sports like tug of war or dodgeball or relay races, etc. Anyways, I noticed that Yamamoto sensei and some of the older female teachers looked like beekeepers. They wore gigantic hats and armbands so they wouldn't get tan. Now, some of you might argue that this could be for health reasons and to prevent skin cancer, wrinkles, or other things. But she literally told me that I looked darker compared to when I first came to Japan. And she said that I should wear these beekeeper outfits so my skin could get lighter. At the time, I was accumulating a lot of frustration that I've had with Yamamoto sensei and with my school in general. So I just straight up told her, like, that in the US, if you made that kind of comment, you could get really insensitive and colorist and racist. I also told her that I've always been tan, and I didn't understand why I needed my skin to be lighter to teach English. And then I asked her why the male PE teachers, again, double standards because Japan, didn't need to worry about getting tan like the women do. And have you ever seen Japanese athletes or even exile? A lot of them, including my soccer boys, are way darker than me. Like, Japanese people can actually get really, really dark tan skin. It looks great. I really don't think that colorism should be a thing here, but it is. And yes, colorism is a thing. It's not because it's not a purely Western concept, so whatever. So no, I think it's actually derived from colorism instead of actual health concerns. It is not a health concern, believe me. There was also this one time when I interacted with an English teacher from a very elite high school in Hamamatsu. When I told him that my family was from Pakistan, he asked me if I was in the Taliban or something. It's a long story, but if you want me to make a video about it, I totally will. I'm very willing to make a video about that because this school is very notorious for being really racist and sexist. To the point where female teachers will actually break contracts. And as for socializing outside of work, sometimes whenever I go out drinking or sightseeing with my friends, I notice that my white friends would get embraced by the Japanese people everywhere and I wouldn't get the same attention. I would totally be invisible to Japanese folks even when I'm clearly speaking in English or clearly hanging out with my friends. And it still happens to me now too. I'd be asked to take a picture of them together instead of being in the picture. And professional photographers would always ask if they could take photos of my white friends, but never really me. They would also ask them all these questions about their background and their culture, and I would end up being the interpreter instead of the main attraction. And that would kind of irritate me at times. And it's not a language thing. It still happens to me now, even when I communicate in Japanese just fine. And in the end, I've learned that my appearance is kind of a filter to weed out gaijin hunters 80% of the time. Like, usually the gaijin hunters totally want white friends as accessories, but they don't want me. Now all of my friendships with Japanese people and like locals are genuine, and I can easily tell that I'm not an accessory to them. I'm just a friend, you know. I think if your identity is the ideal, you'll have a much harder time wondering if the people want to be with you or connect with you to make them look cool or because of you as an individual. So in the end, since I have a lot of friends here, I think it's something that I'd low-key get salty about, but I have a sense of relief with it. Now I'll talk about my positive experiences being here, finally. But at the same time, I think this is also a societal privilege I personally have, for having an American nationality and being a native English speaker. But anyways. So I have a lot of Japanese friends here. I met most of them through this language exchange in my town. I noticed that a lot of them are really curious about Pakistani culture because they didn't know that much besides Malala, which is like the only Desi girl or the only reference to like Pakistani or Desi culture you'll ever see in any MEXT approved Japanese English textbook, which really bothers me. There's so much poverty porn in this. I can go on for days about this topic. This one person and I became really good friends, and I invited her to my place and I made chicken salad for her during my third year in Japan. She was super happy about it, and she told some of her other friends. And at that time, one of my kohai on Jet also did a cooking lesson for an international community center here, and she connected me with one of the coordinators there, actually. And basically this guy asked me to do a cooking lesson on Pakistani food for the program he runs. So I ended up teaching more than 20 Japanese people how to make curry and chutney and raita and pakora, and I was even interviewed about it for a newspaper in my prefecture, Shizuoka. I also kept in touch with a lot of them, and in exchange they teach me how to make Japanese home cooking as well, and it made me really, really happy. And to be honest, I never really cooked Pakistani food on my own until I came here. I would get really homesick because my mom would be oceans away from me. Compared to the short train ride it used to be like in university. So on Skype, my mom would actually teach me how to make like her favorite, like my favorite dishes. And it brings me back to what I said before about representation. I think that if we had more opportunities to show parts of our culture outside of war, outside of poverty porn, it could really change someone's monotone image of a country, and it really like strips the stereotypes we have. And Pakistan is not just a nation born out of war and violence against women. We have our own food, we have our own holidays, we have our own epic weddings, and we have so much to show to the world that is not just poverty porn. I do think learning about war and, you know, not romanticizing everything is very important. However, it should not be the only image that you should have of a country. My friendships with people would always lead me to other cool opportunities. This also happened during my third year. So while on JET, I had also been doing research on high school teaching in Japan. At a conference, I met a professor, and we just had a casual conversation about my cultural identity and my race. And she ended up inviting me to her university, which is a really famous university in Japan. And I got to present about being first generation Pakistani American to her classes, which was pretty cool. I also got to present about my life basically at many universities all over Japan thanks to her. I think another positive thing that comes out of me being here was being able to have some solidarity with other ALTs. Story time! I remember during my second year, I think, I was at a Mexican restaurant in my town. This is an interesting story, and you'll see why in a few seconds. I was putting a lot of spicy salsa in my chimichanga, and this white Canadian ALT, let's call her Sisan. Sisan. Sisan, she really could not handle spicy food, and she looked at me really weird. She's from London, Canada. She asked me why I drown my food out like that, and said it would be too spicy for me in a kind of aggressive way. The caucasity. And I told her it was because it was in my blood. Now, Sisan and I met during our first year, and I'm pretty sure I told her I was Pakistani American, but anyways, she asked me what exactly was in my blood. And I told her I was Pakistani, and I heard a loud, like, "Oh my god!" from across the restaurant. It was a tall, really handsome brown dude with a British accent, named Haroon. He literally ran up to me and said something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you, but did you say you were Pakistani too? I'm Pakistani, but I'm from the UK." I think he kind of said that. And we literally clicked, and we added each other on Facebook, and he was a really awesome Interact ALT. And in university, he studied visual art, and his drawings are amazing. So if you want, maybe I could interview Haroon. Just let me know. Another thing that would happen would be that my expat friends or Japanese friends would connect me with other Desi friends back in their home countries. And I got to interact with a lot of fellow Desi women. And they would actually have a good time overall. I mean, to be honest, it's not all perfect, but mostly they would have a good time. So all in all, being a brown ALT definitely is not easy, but it's absolutely worth it. Our presence makes our diaspora visible to everyone, not just Japanese locals here. And you can thrive and make a huge impact here. Whether you're a JET or an Interact or a student, an engineer, anything really. So I hope this video helps. If you want me to make more videos like this, or if you want me to share crazy stories and tea I have from living here, click subscribe and like this video. Thank you. Bye bye. See you.